It is iPhone versus Pixel, an argument that has gone on for as long as I can remember. And usually for the base models, I would always say that a Pixel is the phone to go to. And this year, the Pixel 10 is not the base phone to go for. And just bear with me as I say this, but I think it might be the iPhone 17. I am sure that you're already typing Apple Authority down in the comments, but honestly, there's reasons behind this. Now, the Pixel 10 this year just feels a little bit lazy, and this is something that I didn't think that I would ever say on an Android channel, and it feels weird to say it, but I think that the iPhone 17 for the same $799 is just a better deal. Let's start with what you get for the price. Now, the Pixel starts at 128 gigs of storage, whilst on the iPhone, you get double at 256 gigs. And if you want that same 256 gigs on the Pixel, you need to fork out $100 more. I think that 128 gigs is just okay in 2025, but the thing is, these phones are meant to last you about 7 years, and coming with 128 gigs of storage is probably not going to last you that 7 years. At least with 256, you know that you're probably going to be okay potentially for up to those 7 years. But if Apple, who famously love to overcharge for storage, say, hey, you know what, 128 gigs is just not the one in 2025, I think everybody kind of needs to be on that same level. And sadly, it only gets worse for Google. The display is a lower resolution. There's no anti-reflective coating, whilst on the iPhone, the display is slightly sharper and you do get some anti-reflectiveness. You do get a bigger battery on the Pixel, but the battery being smaller on the iPhone doesn't, especially in the time that I've used it, seem to mean it dies any quicker than on the Pixel 10. And having that bigger battery on the Pixel 10 means that it's actually 30 grams heavier than the iPhone 17, and you can really tell the difference. And I know that most people won't hold them in their hands side by side, but this is massively more heavy than the iPhone, and you don't really get that much more battery. Now, let me stick on design for a second, because there are a few things that I want to point out. I mentioned the resolution of the display, which is something most people, and even I, don't really notice, but the bigger bezels on the Pixel phone are something that you will notice. The iPhone has much slimmer bezels, and it just means that when you're watching content, it kind of feels a little bit nicer. Now, I'll admit, I used to quite enjoy bashing Apple for thinking that 60Hz on their base iPhone was actually acceptable, but now they really have taken it up a little bit. You get the same 120Hz LTPO Pro Motion display on the base iPhone that you would get on the Pro versions, and that is really nice because it means it can drop down to 1 Hz. Well, on the Pixel, you do get 120 Hz, but that only drops down to 60 Hz. And not being able to drop to 1 Hz on the Pixel and sticking at the lowest of 60 just means that it's going to sip that power just a little bit quicker throughout the day. And because of that 1 Hz display on the iPhone 17, it now means that it's finally caught up to having the always on display, just like the Pixel has had for how many years at this point. The only difference is that on the iPhone, the wallpaper is always on with that display. And I know a lot of people don't really like that, but to get the same feature on the Pixel, you need to bump yourself up to a Pro phone. I feel like last year, a lot of what made the Pixel 9 stand out has been lost with the Pixel 10, because essentially Google have just rebranded the phone and given us almost the exact same phone. And it's a shame because it looks a little bit lazy from Google, and I don't think this is a bad phone. I think it'll be great for a lot of people, but the issue for Google is that Apple really caught up with the base iPhone this year, and in some aspects it just overtook the Pixel and makes this look like a worse phone than it is. Let's talk about what makes these phones actually special, and it is their software. And it feels like I've not given the Pixel 10 a lot of love so far, but luckily one part of the phone that Google got right this year definitely is the software. Android 16 with Material 3 Expressive is great. It feels complete. It's added some bigger, bolder buttons. The animations are great. It's built on what was actually already great with Android 16 and refined it just a little bit more. And honestly, it feels complete compared to iOS 26, which kind of feels like it's still in its beta phase. I don't mind saying this really, I think that the Liquid Glass 5 is pretty good. I quite like it, and you have to give them credit. It is impressive, and no one else is doing it yet, but like I said, this just doesn't feel finished. So far there's just a load of bugs with iOS 26, and if you have a look at that control center, this is just a bit of a mess. I actually don't know how this was allowed to release. And just look at this, comparing it to the Pixel, Android 16 feels so much more polished, and iOS 26 honestly looks like a little bit of a bad skin on top of iOS. And then this brings me to just how dumb the iPhone can be. This doesn't feel like a phone that has AI built in it from the ground up, as Tim likes to say. There is no circle to search on iPhone, and I miss it so much. There is highlight to search, but to do that, you need to do the whole screenshot action. Then you can't see what you circle, and it's slow, and it even has a Temu option. Like, why? And then trying to compare Siri to Gemini, that is absolutely night and day. Right, let me try and prove to you that I'm not making this up. So, like, simple questions. Start with Siri. When was the iPhone 15 released?
You can find details on all Apple products at apple.com.
Come on. Now the Pixel. When was the iPhone 15 released?
The iPhone 15 was released on September 22nd, 2023.
How many calories are in a standard chocolate cheesecake?
A single slice of chocolate cheesecake typically contains 350 to 800 calories.
How many calories are in like a standard chocolate cheesecake?
Do you want me to use ChatGPT to answer that?
I feel like it can't complete simple commands, and then trying to ask it to do anything that is complicated is almost impossible. And then just even comparing something simple like Apple's cleanup tool to Magic Eraser, it is slow, and I just think it does a worse job than the Pixel. It's kind of not fun to use. Now, it's definitely a preference when it comes to software. Some of you are going to love iOS 26, and then some of you are going to think that Android 16 is the best thing you can get, and I kind of side on that, really. I feel like iOS 26 is trying to play catch up to what Android has had for years, and Android 16 has just been able to build on what it was already good at, and it feels like an actual fully complete piece of software, where AI is not just something that is tagged on to the end, it feels like it is baked in. There is one part though where the iPhone definitely is not playing catch up, and that is in its performance. The iPhone 17 smokes the Pixel when it comes to benchmarking, and I know benchmarks aren't everything, and I don't really like the comparisons, but the fact that you know that the iPhone is just that much more powerful than the Pixel, it's kind of sad. The problem is that the Pixel's G5 is just not a little bit behind the A19. It is massively far behind, and it's just not a great look. I feel like Google might never fully catch up at this point. Yeah, they might close the gap a little bit, but I don't think it's ever going to be as powerful as what Apple can produce. And I know we've said it before, that you never buy a Pixel for pure power, because you're never going to get it. It's all really well optimized. However, I actually think that on a base phone, the power is quite important. I don't do a lot of gaming on my phone personally, but I know that people picking up these phones definitely will. If you pick up a base phone, whether that's from Google or whether that's from Apple, it kind of has to be good at everything because you need it for everything. And if you pick up the iPhone 17 this year, you are going to get better performance, and you are going to get that for longer periods. It runs cooler than the Pixel, and in turn, because it runs cooler and it's just optimized slightly better, you're also not going to use as much battery, so that battery is going to last a little bit longer. Playing something like Call of Duty, you don't really notice it in small bursts, but like I said, the Pixel here, it does get pretty hot. As I mentioned battery, let me just talk about it really quickly. So in around about 20 minutes, you can get to 55% on the iPhone 17, whilst on the Pixel 10, it takes 30 minutes to get to 50%. Google did add Pixel Snap to the Pixel phones this year, and I love it. And yeah, it's essentially MagSafe, but the charging speeds for wireless charging are a little bit slower on the Pixel compared to the iPhone. Now, I know not a lot of people might charge their phones wirelessly, but you get 15 watts on the Pixel and 25 watts on the iPhone 17. There is one part of the Pixel 10 though that just stands out over the iPhone 17, and it's the fact that on this phone you get a telephoto camera for the first time on a base Pixel. As nice as it was for Google to give us that 10 megapixel telephoto zoom on the Pixel 10, annoyingly that meant that we got a worse 48 megapixel f1.7 main and a real drop in the ultra wide from 48 megapixels to 13 megapixels. Now the iPhone doesn't have that telephoto zoom except its digital 2x crop, but the main is a 48 megapixel f1.6 and that ultra wide is also 48 megapixels, so way ahead of what you can get on the Pixel 10. And these are photos taken from the ultra-wide main and the 5x, and as the iPhone doesn't have a 5x, I just use the digital zoom to try and match these two phones up. And talking about that zoom, it's no question here that the Pixel does a much better job because it has that optical lens. The images are much clearer, there's a lot more detail, and even though this is only a 10 megapixel lens, I'd rather have an optical zoom than not have one at all. The zoom lens also comes in really useful for low light photos because because I think the iPhone here doesn't do a great job at all. It's not awful, but it's definitely not great. There's lots of noise in the iPhone photo, and of course this is because I've digitally zoomed, but it's also not a lot of detail in this either, and the pixel here massively comes out on top. On the main lens though, it's much closer. The iPhone seems to want to put this warm orangey tint on every photo that I take, while the Pixel does a little bit less of that. They both have really nice details, to be honest, and I don't think you'll be complaining about the photos that the phones can take. When it comes to dynamic range on both, I think the Pixel just does a bit of a better job here. And even in low light photos, it's actually pretty hard to say that I prefer the Pixel over the iPhone, because they both give you a pretty nice photo. On the ultrawide though, the iPhone is the real winner here. Because it has a much bigger sensor in low light, it grabs so much more detail than the Pixel does. And I think that the iPhone even handles really bright lights a little bit better than the Pixel 10. And this is disappointing because last year's ultrawide on the Pixel 9, I actually thought was really good for low light photos. And moving into daylight situations, the iPhone, again, it gives you a better photo. It's definitely closer than it is in low light photos. And even though the iPhone does give you a little bit of a warm tint on those photos, I mean, I'm picking this one all day long over the Pixel. And let me quickly just mention the upgraded selfie camera on the iPhone, because I got to give it to Apple here. Being able to take a landscape and portrait photo while just holding the phone upright on the iPhone, this is really nice.
Okay, let's try and get close to these geese. Although geese are terrifying.
Now, when it comes to video on both of these phones, I just don't think there's really a huge competition here. The Pixel's stabilization and its details are just not as good as you can get on the iPhone 17. And I think that the iPhone has been the standard, the gold standard for video over the last couple of years. And even on the base iPhone, it is still, I think, better than what you can get on the Pixel 10. When it comes to low light video, the Pixel, it kind of adds a lot of noise into the shadows, and the details overall aren't great. And stabilization here, again, takes a hit. And I don't think I need to tell you how much better the iPhone's video is here.
Right, let's test some front-facing video, and I always forget to do any sort of video on the selfie camera because I hate selfies. But this is the audio from the iPhone, and then I'll switch to the Pixel, and you can see what the audio sounds like from this. Now, in the display, this one, the video on the Pixel doesn't look as good and as bright as it does on the iPhone, but you can tell me which one you prefer out of these two.
I feel like I need to just say this one more time. I love Pixels, and for years, if you were going to pick up a base phone, the Pixel was always the phone to go to. I'm not looking for ways to praise the iPhone. I would rather sit here and say to you that the Pixel spec for spec is better than the iPhone 17, but this year, it just isn't. I think we've got a bit of a mixture here, that Google got a little bit lazy and practically gave us the same phone with an added camera, but a worse spec main lens. And I just do not think that they expected Apple to come out swinging with what they've done with the iPhone 17. And also the fact that you need to spend an extra $100 just to get the base storage of the iPhone on a Pixel is also not great. No matter how many times that I say I love the Pixel, I know that the top comment probably is already, oh look, it's Apple authority, but you know, I just don't want to sit here and say that the Pixel 10 is a better phone when objectively the iPhone 17 this year is just a better deal. But hopefully what this does is it pushes Google to give us something a little bit more exciting on the Pixel 11, and then that can go back to being the gold standard of base phones. I feel like the iPhone 17 being this good of a phone is healthy because it will push Google to make something better when it comes to the Pixel 11. Let me know your thoughts down below though about the Pixel 10 versus the iPhone 17. I'm genuinely curious to see what everyone thinks about this. Before you head off, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you do that, then I'll see you in the next one.